leadership's a function of who you put in the chair, not just for private equity, it's across the board. There's a lot of people that love to be leaders, but there's very few people that love leadership.
On this episode of Executive Edge, Simon is joined by Aaron Miller, a private equity legend and partner in Apollo's private equity business.
Operating partners are going to have to become technology enabled. Technology, I think, for a long time in the operating partner world has been something that's been done on the side.
Aaron breaks down how consulting shaped his mindset, the evolution of operating partner roles, and how culture, leadership, and technology, especially AI, are reshaping private equity.
In the operating role, you can have a board seat, but you're also providing advisory support. How do you kind of balance between those multiple roles in a way that's effective for the portfolio?
You're not balancing the role, you're really fulfilling a certain role. I always frame it as this. When you're the operator, you're responsible for doing all the work and you're accountable for that outcome.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Executive Edge. Very excited to have with me an OG, someone who is highly respected and somewhat of a legend within the operator economy and ecosystem, but very specifically within private equity, Aaron Miller. So excited to have you on, Aaron. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
For anyone who doesn't know who Aaron is a partner in Apollo's private equity business and the chairman of Apollo Portfolio Performance Solutions, a PPS for short. Apollo, again, for those who don't know, is a very well-known American asset management firm within the private equity industry, primarily invests in alternate assets with $840 billion of assets under management, AUM. Prior to joining Apollo in 2019, Aaron was the chief operating officer at Catalina Marketing, covering Europe, Asia, and the US. Prior to that was the operating director at Berkshire Partners. Aaron spent over a decade at Bain & Company, and another senior partner from Bain & Company is someone I interviewed earlier this morning, another recording that will probably come out right before Aaron's. Early in his career, Aaron also held key product and operations leadership roles with companies such as General Mills, Cereal Partners Worldwide, joint venture between General Mills and Nestle in the US and in Latin America. Aaron served on the board of several Apollo portfolio companies, which is standard for an operating partner within PE. But some of those companies include McGraw-Hill Education, Tech Data Corporation. Aaron received his MBA from Wharton, University of Pennsylvania, and his BS in chemical engineering. And anyone who hasn't done that, it is up there with aeronautic engineering as one of the most complicating and technical degrees out there, from Northwestern University. And he is also fluent, not just obviously in English, but also in Spanish and Portuguese. Thanks again for coming on, Aaron.
Thank you. Appreciate the intro.
So your experience as an operator, someone with an operator mindset, consulting with clients, working in operations yourself all around the world, and then moving into the private equity industry. I've got my perspective, but I'd really, really be interested in hearing yours. Like, what did you take from consulting that really helped in being an operator, and potentially what kind of conflicted? Like, what did you have to unlearn from those skills in order to kind of be effective as a leader in industry and then in PE?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. My consulting experience was a little different than most. I did the traditional strategy consulting role for about half the time I was at Bain, and I think that was tremendous with respect to teaching me how to structure ideas and to provide deeper thinking around a variety of issues. Back then, we were all pretty much generalists at Bain. But I spent 5 of those years, we created a separate legal entity called Bain Corporate Renewal Group, in which we were turning around distressed private equity assets. And I think that combination really forced me to really think more deeply about how to execute, you being strategic, but at the same time, how to execute with speed. And the common phrase I use now with people is running water through the pipes. It's sort of, how do you quickly develop a strategy, but then quote unquote, run the water through the pipes, even in your head and with your teams, so that when you start to execute, you have a tremendous amount of confidence that you can execute with speed and accuracy. And I think the combination of those two experiences where, I got to serve as a COO of a couple of companies during that time that were private equity owned, but in very difficult financial straits. And at the same time, working with years before and years and after large clients with strategy issues that required a little more deep patience and deeper thinking. I think the combination for me was unique and prepared me well for private equity.
And in your roles that you've had recently as well, there's quite an interesting dynamic within being an operating partner, right? Because if you're a board member and it's a public company, perhaps there are certain roles, right? You don't generally tend to be an investor. You've been hired into that board position. You could be a consultant, a senior advisor. You're then also independent. In the operating role, you can have a board seat. You can be connected to the team that made the original investment decision and perhaps decisions for, later capital injections. But you're also providing advisory support to the C-levels to help them, through some challenges that they might be facing. How do you kind of balance between those multiple roles in a way that's effective for the portfolio?
Well, I think the first part for me, I think this has developed over the course of time. I think the roles, you're not balancing the roles, you're really fulfilling a certain role. And that I think there are operations roles. And I always frame it as this: when you're the operator, you're responsible for doing all the work and you're accountable for that outcome. If you're an advisor, you're just responsible for doing work and giving advice.
Mm-hmm.
I see the operating partner role as what I call a steward. You're accountable for the outcomes, but if you do no work, hypothetically, no, I mean, it's not that people are looking for a deck from you. They're not looking for a set of materials or a set of analysis from you. They're looking for an outcome. And so you orient yourself in the operating partner role towards the outcome more than you orient yourself towards the advice. At the same time, you have to acknowledge that the operator is responsible for delivering that work, and you're jointly responsible for the outcome. And I think when you step back and view it that way, you're not really striking a balance. You're letting all the players in the ecosystem play the role that they're supposed to play. You have a part, they have a part, and then let's not forget investment teams, because investment teams have an oversight role in many regards, and they ultimately are responsible for the outcomes, even at the same level as the management team and the CEO. So once you understand that balance, then it's a matter of where do you fit yourself in and where can you add the most value. And I think most of the time for me, it's been much heavier leaning than purely advisory when I'm actually in the operating partner role. And so I don't find it difficult. And I think people who really understand that this is what this job is don't necessarily find it that difficult either.
And has that approach, and then also the structure of is it APPS, how's that evolved since you first got involved? Is that the significantly larger teams of the arm's length versus accountable kind of approach to oversight and support for the portcos changed?
It hasn't really. I think what's changed, the team has clearly grown. When we started, we had a team of 5 people. Most of those individuals we've had to, over the course of time, switch out. And so we have a team of 35 to 40 today. The team has really, the ethos and the psychology around the team hasn't really changed. We're truly attempt to be partners to both the management team and to the investment teams. And the phrase we often used was, it's a climber guide relationship. We are the guides. We have, whether it's technology expertise, it's operations expertise. It may be that we have expertise in certain areas of talent, or we may be generalists that help guide the team. But our job is to guide those executives up the climb and to put them first, along with the investment team. And that ethos has remained today, which means we've had really highly, highly talented operators in our team across all sectors: generalists, technology, talent, sourcing. but all who come to the table with this idea of being guides to
Mhm.
others that are climbing. And that, I think that has been the common thread throughout. I think that also allows us to lean in a little more because
Okay.
we understand that we are not necessarily the ones that are responsible at the end of the day for making it happen. But gosh darn it, we better make sure that others are as prepared as possible to make that climb. So that has not changed at all. Team is bigger,
Mhm.
more functions. We have 8 functions today versus starting with 1, 2. But I think the team now works in an integrated fashion. So if we need to address a really complex ESG
Yeah.
issue, it may be that we're doing that in coordination with our data team, or if we have a complex sourcing issue, that it may be our technology and our generalists who are working together in an integrated fashion. That has remained the same since day one.
For me, it's a fascinating difference really behind private equity as a source of capital versus all the other groups out there, right, from venture capital to just traditional funding and banking. That added value, that aligned interest, right, vested interest, and also the leveraging of expertise within the advisory operating partner group. That model, I think, is one of the reasons that private equity has grown from strength to strength in the last few decades, and especially that the operating partner role and group has grown as well. I mean, we were reminiscing before we hit record about conferences like Private Equity International, PEI, right? That I don't know how many years ago it was when you first attended that operating partner conference, but significantly smaller than it is now. And that's not just a reflection of how well those guys have done building up a great conference, but also just a reflection of the growth in the industry, right?
I think the industry officially probably started in 2001 with the creation of Capstone, which is KKR's group.
Yeah.
Prior to that, there were operating partners. Bain and Company had them, Carlyle had them, but formally established. And I say that we went through this progression over the next 20 years in which early on in those 2000s, there was more players in the NBA than there were operating partners. Sort of take
It's funny.
12 players and multiply by 32 and you get the number there. And then you progress towards the end of the decade, but you still had more players in Major League Baseball. You sort of take 30 there, 30 cities, multiply by 26. But there were still more players in Major League Baseball than there were operating partners. And you probably progressed to around, nobody knows exactly, but 2015, where at that point you crossed, and it's really incredible, the number of players in the NFL and operating partners were somewhat in the same ballpark as, 50 times 30, about 1,500.
Yeah.
Now we've exploded to thousands and thousands of operating partners. But the industry, as it's formally been established, is still 25 years old, but didn't really explode until the last 5 to 10 years. And so it's really interesting when people think about it as this established entity. It exists forever, but it's incredibly young. It's marginally older than Facebook, so or Meta, as we want to call it. So it's not that old.
Yeah, I worked with I don't know, think of the names, but Todd Cooper, Adam Fless back at Capstone 20. I don't want to say 20 years ago, probably 18 years ago, but that was really my first foray back when I was 80 Carney into the operating partner world and what that group meant within a private equity organization. And I was, these guys really cared, right? They were really there to partner with the firm. Everything they were doing was focused on results and being effective. They cared about just extremely authentic and that very fast paced moving but respectful mindset was just it really changed my view all those years ago, and both great guys as well. Let's step back a little bit just to you, because I think beyond the role and the industry that you work in, I think your background is impressive and fascinating enough as well. Let's talk about the being multilingual as an example. I mean, I know that you've traveled all over the world, but how's that helped you? I mean, were you naturally fluent in Spanish or Portuguese, or is that something you've kind of picked over the last few years? And have you used that to your advantage? I mean, it's
I don't know if anybody's naturally fluent unless you're born or raised in an environment, and I was not.
Yeah.
I'm an English speaker. I think if the only thing I had was my parents are Jamaican. At least we came from the same, I guess, kingdom, you and I, at one point in time, for lack of a better word.
That's easy.
But my parents are Jamaican. I took an interest in Spanish, uh, probably when I was at General Mills. It led me to pursuing the role in Mexico, pursued the role, wound up in Mexico turning around plants. It's where I happened to also meet my wife.
Okay.
I immersed myself culturally, and I think same thing when I went to Brazil. I spent some time at the Lauder Institute at Wharton, the MBA program there, and that's where I learned Portuguese. But I think when you learn a language, you have a choice, and you're either going to learn the language devoid of the culture, you're going to learn the language and understand the culture, or you can learn a language and you can become part of the culture. And I think the times that I spent definitely in Mexico for a time, and I became part of the culture. I immersed myself in ways that I probably didn't anticipate. I think when I went to Brazil, I understood the culture. It was a shorter period of time that I was there. But both of those experiences made me far more empathetic when I came back to work in the United States. And it made me a more effective leader because I started to understand that my point of view wasn't the only point of view. And not only point of view, my paradigm, the context in which I saw things wasn't the same. And when you start to think about the context that others live in and the context, even within your own country, even within your own quote unquote homeland, it allows you to see problems in different ways, to lead people, I think, more effectively, but also to develop organizations more effectively. And I think it's been critical for me, that experience in Mexico, in Brazil, and then subsequently, running teams across Asia and Europe has made me a stronger, much better leader. So it goes far beyond the question of language and extends into the question of culture.
I hope, right, with the speed at which translation tools are evolving and getting better, and to use your Meta reference, there'll probably be translation embedded into the Ray-Ban Meta glasses to the point at which you'll just be able to. I mean, I even think that beta testing some of this now, where you can hear another person talking in a different language and it will provide a transcript, on the lens and the screen that allows you to see that. The danger of that, even though it does kind of streamline communications and allows people to to communicate more effectively quickly, maybe you lose a bit of that magic, right, of actually forcing yourself to be embedded, and kind of learn from scratch, and maybe even learn the meaning behind some of the words and the pronunciation that allow you to see their culture from their side, and maybe hold back from not feeling you need to integrate and actually travel to that location. I mean, do you think that there's a danger that people will lose that edge that you picked up from learning the language from scratch and without growing up in the native tongue?
I think it'll always be a choice.
Yeah.
And I think it'll depend on what you're trying to do. I think there's going to be definitely a place. I think, people who are going to be able to fly out of country and sit and engage in a dialogue with a group of native speakers when they may be the only native speaker. I think that's going to be incredible. I still think there are people that will make the choice to immerse themselves culturally elsewhere and understand the nuance of a culture far beyond the language. And I think that, I don't think that can ever be lost unless we become monolithic culturally worldwide, which pretty tough for that to happen. I think you'll always be able to make that choice in terms of how much do you want to grow as a person. And I don't see that ever ending.
I read something. I'm not going to be able to quote the exact statistics, but there is thousands of languages that are still practiced today, and there's like 90% of them are spoken by like less than, I don't know, 200 people. So that to me is just mind-boggling, right? Just outside the main languages that everyone operates in today. But to your point that there are still similarities across culture, and it's tapping into those respectfully and with with empathy that allows you to see things from their point of view, and and hopefully be more effective in operations, which I think is cool. So I mean, you've lived in a lot of places around the world, and I'm sure traveled as well with work. Are you is there a certain part of the world that you might retire to, or is there a place that you're really fond of that you go back to on a regular basis?
Well, I mean, look, most people think I already live in Atlanta. I'll probably retire to Atlanta, but
Okay.
I'm most fond of Rio de Janeiro. I
Okay.
think the experience in Rio, it was fun. Most people might think I know why I loved Rio, but it really was, I think, a place that challenged me culturally, challenged me artistically, it challenged me on every single dimension you could possibly imagine, and really diving into Rio and all that it was. It's a place that's so rich in history. Many people think of it as Carnival or think of it
Yeah.
as beaches, and it's so rich in terms of history, in terms of you know, everything you could possibly imagine. I was fortunate enough to spend a semester there studying philosophy and supply chain, if you can think both of those at the same time. And I think I will
Awesome.
never forget that experience. In addition to doing a couple of deals there around the document storage business early in my career. So, and then working on an airline there. So I've been to Brazil so many times, but I've actually had a chance to live, work, and study in Rio, which is, other than the United States, the place I've done all three.
No, that's fascinating. So are you at some point going to do guest lecturing? Is that something that professors will reach out to you on? I mean, I think you'd be fantastic at it, but is it, is that a desire at some point, or?
It's something I already do. So I'll be at Wharton next week. That's lecturing. I do some small sessions at Harvard once a year. I do probably 3 or 4 sessions at Wharton every year, and we'll see how that goes over the course of time. We never know where life takes us. I
Yeah.
do enjoy it, and I think I enjoy being attached to individuals, or having the opportunity to be in front of individuals who are hungry to see a different perspective. And so that time at Wharton is been increasingly fun each year that I do it, and we'll see what that ends up happening over the long haul.
Which professors sessions do you generally guest lecture in? Are you kind of bounced around, or is there
I
one?
have bounced around, most recently Professor Burku
Okay.
with private equity.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Oh, then I mean, the students are very lucky to be able to get you to, listen, hear you speak in, in real time, and be able to kind of answer and bounce questions off you. I mean, I know a ton of them, at least on the East Coast, getting into private equity, or at least they have that as a target career path, and there's a lot of anxiety around how that might evolve, and the opportunities, etc. And so I can imagine it's a well attended class for sure. Um, and then on the private equity side, are you any predictions for the industry in the next 10 to 20 years? I mean, a lot more of the same, or just continued growth, or do you see any kind of fundamental transformative changes happening in the near term?
20 years is a long time. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure
Yes.
I'd have been effective. If I'm effective at predicting what's going to happen 20 years from now, then there's a lot of things I would probably be doing right now. Look, I think that private equity, you can read any report you want to read. There's plenty of capital in the world. And there are fewer deals, and the ability to create positive outcomes or attractive outcomes on the deals is becoming increasingly hard. So I think almost anybody you ask, and I think that's been one of the things we focused on heavily at Apollo over the last 6 or 7 years, is that the ability to drive value from operations will become more and more important. And those that can do it systematically, programmatically, configure solutions for companies efficiently effective, which I think we're doing at Apollo, and we're becoming more effective every day at it, I think those companies will win. Operating partners are going to have to become technology enabled. And that has been something, technology, I think, for a long time in the operating partner world has been something that's been done on the side. And I think you're going to see it integrated in the model. I think we've done that effectively at Apollo. We don't even just have one technology group. We've split our groups into technology infrastructure. We have data digital, product, and AI. So we're covering the full gambit with expertise across the board and integrating that effectively into other aspects and other functions. So whether it's our ESG function integrating data, whether it's our sourcing function. Today, I think we use AI within our sourcing function. We have a $60 billion spend cube that we manage using AI to read contracts in order to identify leakage that occurs across our value chain. Those are very unique things that I think that we are doing that are exceptional. I think that is going to become much more of the norm. And in the absence of that, I think firms that aren't doing that will suffer.
That's super interesting. It really is fascinating to get your perspective again. I think reflect on the past 20 years and how much the industry has changed, and also the operating, partner structure the next 20 years. Who knows where it's going to go for sure. But I think that's interesting that you're already adopting those technologies, you're driving them. While, the size of AUM that you guys have, and when people look at private equity firms, they're like, that's hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. But the portcos themselves aren't necessarily that large, right? There's several hundreds of millions, sometimes on the low billion side. So, they do need advice on the latest technology. They don't necessarily have the large tech teams that some, public companies and Fortune 100 firms will. So them being able to lean on a center of excellence, especially around a discipline that's evolving so quickly. And, do they spend money on it? Do they not? How can it be used effectively? I think is critical to the industry. Are other groups doing that? Are you hearing, the same from the other cohorts that go to PEI? Or
I think the conference this past couple of days is heavily focused on AI. What I think is key, though, is you and I could both choose to focus on technology.
Mm-hmm.
The differentiation comes when I can develop patterns and clear playbooks for action that are flexible enough so that I can apply them across multiple situations. Yep. And I think I can't speak to say that a firm is effective or less effective, but as an industry, the industry has historically focused on just doing projects within an individual portfolio company. When you get to the point that you can execute repeatedly across a series of companies, and with fewer people using third parties that can sort of rinse and repeat, that's the point in which you can really drive accelerated value creation. I think we are starting to do that with respect to AI. We've done that already with respect to when we do a carve out. It's I'm not going to say it's flawless. No carve out's flawless, but the repeatability across our carve outs, the repeatability in which we deploy data platforms, the repeatability in which we're now executing, whether it be pricing or whether it be a series of other initiatives, is just it's accelerating almost exponentially. So I think there are many other firms that are trying to follow and do that. There's a few that are doing that effectively, but I think it's one of those things that there will be leaders and there'll be followers, and there'll probably be 4 or 5 or 6 firms that really lead, and the other will see that example over the course of time and follow. I think we're leading. I'm pretty sure we're leading.
I like it. That's it's a good call for action and some competition out there. Before we wrap up, Aaron, I wanted to ask you kind of a broader question as well around just generally leadership and some of your lessons from your experience, and maybe some of the blood, sweat, and tears, right? In what's effective and what's not. Love to hear your view.
I think it's one of those things. I think this is probably, along with talent, but I think, talent is leadership's a function of who you put into the chair, is one of the most important things, not just for private equity. It's just, it's across the board. And there's a phrase that has started to come to my mind often, which is there's a lot of people that love to be leaders, but there's very few people that love leadership. And I think that is something, forget as a country in the US and probably globally need to worry about, but it's, I think it's increasingly important. I definitely look for it when I hire in my teams, whether my teams are private equity or otherwise. We starting to look for it more and more when we hire in the portfolio. But the idea of individuals who have a set of firm principles to guide their leadership and their thinking, because what you often get when you have a leader that doesn't have leadership is you get a manager, you get a facilitator. And regardless of whether they've been a CEO before, regardless of whether they've been on top of a large organization, when an organization really needs to inflect, truly inflect, there has to be someone there who is willing to remove the friction that's associated with that organization inflecting and provide the energy that's necessary for the organization to do so. And I think more and more, not more and more, I think people are starting to recognize this, definitely in private equity, and identify people who are leaders who love leadership more than just managers who sit on top of organizations. And so I think it's something that I have found interesting over the years, and I've probably become less compromising over the course of time in finding those individuals.
Interesting. So it's not just a mindset, but also a capability to flip, right? Be agile, be a wartime as well as a peacetime CEO. Depending on the environment in which you're having to operate. Is that?
Yeah, and I think it's step into the breach, for lack of a better word. The phrase I've used recently for those that love American football is stay in the pocket, right? Okay. There's, when we think about, and I'm not a lover of the Patriots, but someone like Tom Brady, it's can you stay in the pocket and deliver the strike? And regardless of the circumstances around you and regardless of what's going to happen, I think it's common. I tend to hire a lot of people from West Point. I tend to hire a lot of people who've been from academies of leadership. And the reason is they have a deep understanding of that and what it really means. And I think the more you can build your organization with leaders throughout, not just at the top, the stronger your organization is over the course of time.
Yeah, no, I love it. That's extremely telling. And I think there's, there's limited number of people that have that broad insight, right? Because you're not just hiring, you're also operating with.
Yes.
You're involved in making changes, across multiple organizations, right? At any time in any given year, and seen it over a couple of decades. So that view is, I think is worth its weight in gold. It's extremely important. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. It's fantastic to chat with you, Aaron. I really appreciate your time. I know for anyone who's in PE themselves, maybe at a smaller firm, or is an operating partner, or even a deal partner, I think on the finance side, we'll hopefully find the conversation interesting. If you post any images or there's any video from some of your guest lectures, I know people would be interested in seeing that out on LinkedIn. So just want to say thank you again for your time on Friday. It was great to see you. So appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.